Joining us now is the Minister responsible for managed isolation and quarantine, Megan Woods. Good evening, Minister. What is the best option for administering this? I mean, how are you going to collect it? Are you going to have a voucher system with the airlines, or what's the plan?
Oh, good evening, Lisa. Look, the best option is that this will be a scheme that will be administered by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, because one of the things that we do need to put into there is also some discretionary power to make waivers, and that will sit with the Chief Executive of MB.
So will you pay before you get on a plane, or what's the situation?
Look, no, because we have to have that ability to do waivers, and for some people that probably will be when they arrive in the country. In terms of exactly the time that people will receive their invoice, we haven't quite got to that detail, but that is coming as we draft up the regs.
So will you have to sign or commit to some kind of declaration that you will pay in order to get on a plane to come home?
Oh, well, look, it is the law of New Zealand that if that you fall into a category that is defined under law, that you need to pay a fee. That is the law of New Zealand. You don't opt in or out of that by signing a declaration. That is the law of the country.
So how much is this going to make you? How much revenue will you actually get from it?
So look, the modelling, there are broad ranges around it. It is somewhere probably between about 2.2 million through to around 9 million in terms of the categories that we have said will be eligible for charging. But one of the things is...
how much to collect that, Minister?
It depends.
Sorry to interrupt.
600,000.
Right, okay, so why bother? Why bother?
Look, I think that it is only fair and reasonable and gets that right balance, that if someone's choosing to go away on a holiday, if someone's choosing to go away on a business trip, they're making that choice knowing the regime is in place. They're not people that have been caught in other parts of the world who desperately want to get home, that they should pick up the tab for their own managed isolation. And look, we don't know how long we're going to have these facilities in place and how much New Zealanders will begin to travel more, will make decisions. I know that if I made a decision to go overseas on a holiday and decided I was just going to factor in 2 weeks of managed isolation at the end of it, I wouldn't think it were particularly fair if the New Zealand taxpayer had to pay for that.
So on the basis of tops $9 million revenue generated from charging people, you have basically created two classes of New Zealanders now, haven't you? Those who can afford to come and go and those who can't.
No, look, anyone who is making a choice to leave New Zealand to go on holiday in a world where we are in the midst of a global pandemic, let's not put that aside. Anyone who is making that choice, anyone who's going overseas because they're looking to on business, they're looking to make money, that they'll pay for that themselves. What we have said for those returning New Zealanders who might be here for less than 90 days, if they need to come back because they've got a dying parent or they're coming back to attend a funeral, that there is the ability to have waivers. That what we are doing is setting up what is, I think, a fair and balanced regime where people who are making choices about travel are being asked to pick up the tab for it, and I think that that gets the balance about right.
How far will those waivers go? What if you need to come back or want to come back for a wedding? Could you get a waiver for that?
Look, I think it's where we're seeing compassionate grounds. I'm not going to get into making subjective decisions about hypothetical cases.
Well, it is subjective where you set the line, isn't it, Minister?
Yeah.
That is subjective. So, for example, let's say you've got an elderly parent who you want to come home and visit. They're not on their deathbed, they're just elderly, and you would like to keep your links up with your family. You're not coming for 90 days. So, unless you can afford to do that, you're keeping families separate?
Well, look, that's exactly the kind of thing that an exemptions regime has stood up. It's what we're doing with an exemptions regime about people's ability to leave managed isolation. We are in the midst of a global pandemic here. We will strike that right balance. We will say what is fair and reasonable. What we've said in terms of the people we will not charge for coming home is those people that have often been caught in quite unfortunate circumstances in other parts of the world. They desperately want to get back to their home. They have a legal right to do that. They want to come here, they want to work, they want to pay tax, their kids want to go to school, they want to make their lives here. We're saying we won't charge those people. But what we are hearing a lot of anecdotal data about is New Zealand residents and citizens who are choosing to come back for holidays in their country, because it's a pretty desirable place in the world to be at the moment, New Zealand.
Do you know what actual percentage are coming back for holidays?
No, and I was very careful there. I said we're hearing a lot of
so you don't have
anecdotes. No, but we also know that this is something that could grow. grow in the future. And I think most people would recognise that if we have New Zealanders that are living in other parts of the world but decide they want to come back and have some skiing or some of our wonderful summer, that actually they should pay for their managed isolation in that context.
If you're making people pay, why not offer a cheaper option? Like, for example, isolating in a private home, because you allow diplomats to do that, don't you?
Oh, look, what we made a decision of as a country was that actually we weren't having self-isolation, we were having managed isolation. And this has been an incredibly important part of how we've kept COVID out of our communities. We as a government are committed to that we're saying that anybody who is entering New Zealand has to do 14 days in a managed isolation facility, except in some very rare circumstances, and that they need to pass day 3 and day 12 tests, that we can't be saying that we're going to put a price on that. We enjoy some of the most social and economic liberties in the world, and it's because of the sacrifices we all made, and we're not a government that's going to give that up lightly.
How many diplomats have been allowed in and don't have to self-isolate in a managed facility?
Look, I don't have that number on me. We can get that for you. But we also have a very rare number.
So how do you monitor them, or you just it's on a trust basis? You're just allowing them to stay in private residence on a trust basis?
And there's also checking regimes that are put in around it. But
you won't allow your own citizens the same privileges?
No, we as a country have made a decision that in order for the majority of people, except in some very rare circumstances, there's some international conventions about our ability to do this with diplomats, but we've also made some exemptions for some people with particular medical conditions around their need to be in a managed isolation facility. But the expectation, if you're rejoining the team of 5 million, we are asking people to make that sacrifice to spend 14 days in managed isolation, to pass to have a negative day 3 and a negative day 12 test before we allow them back into the community, and we stand by that, because this is the way we're keeping COVID out of our communities.
Minister, before you go, Air New Zealand has pushed out the hold on incoming bookings on flights. So are you going to pay them compensation for business lost? What conversations are you having about that?
Well, my understanding is actually a large number of tickets have been sold on Air New Zealand flights, that we've got quite high inflows of people over the next 14 days, if you look at our published inflow figures. But
they could book more if they didn't have a hold on flights. They say they're in conversations for you, so do you think compensation is going to be on the table for them?
Look, we're at about 32% loadings on our flights, on Air New Zealand flights, is my understanding. Look, Lisa, they're not conversations I'm having. The Ministry of Transport may well be, but they're not conversations I've been involved in.
Thank you for joining us. That is the Minister for Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Megan Woods.